All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back once again. It is I think it's episode 172 to 174-ish. I'm not 100% sure on the number, but we're back with another championship edition of Keeping It Rio. And I'm very excited for today's guest. It's one of the early morning Saturday AM podcasts, which historically are my favorite ones. I like when it's still kind of dark and the world's not awake yet, and I get to meet some pretty cool people. So this morning, I've got a great guest. I'm very excited to hear about his story and some of the things he's got going on in life right now. Without any hesitation, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to welcome Nick Gaylord to Keeping It Rio. Nick, welcome to Keeping It Rio, my friend. How's it going?
Very good. Good morning, Chuck. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here for sure. It's 5:55 a.m. on Saturday morning, and I joke and say there's no place I'd rather be, and that's the truth. So I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's early, and not everybody gets up this early on a Saturday, so must be doing something cool. Must have something special going on this morning, and I look forward to learning more about it. So tell us a little bit about yourself, my friend. Where are you coming at us from this morning?
All right. Well, I am coming to you from Tampa, Florida. I was actually born and raised on Long Island in New York. I spent the first 40 years of my life there. My wife and I moved to actually pretty close to your neighborhood, just outside of Austin, Texas. We lived in Bastrop, Texas, small town about 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes east of Austin. We lived there for 6 years. It was my job actually, that took us there. I've been working in the pharmaceutical clinical trial industry since I was 19. I'm 48 now, so quite a long time.
Couple years.
Couple years. And it was a job that took us to Austin. I had actually been feeling like I was kind of stuck in my job where we were in New York and looking for a new opportunity, wasn't really getting it. And through a friend and former colleague, he put me in touch with somebody just outside of Austin, a gentleman that ran a clinical trial packaging facility, and he was looking for someone to be the production manager to run the packaging and labeling division. So I had some phone calls with him. My friend got me in touch with him, and we had a bunch of phone calls. And in December of 2015, he flew my wife and I down for an interview. And at that point, I kind of figured I'm really going to have to screw this up. If he's flying both of us down there, I'm going to have to screw this up pretty hard if I'm not going to get this job. But, we flew down on a Thursday night, spent all day Friday there, and then we stuck around. We stayed in Bastrop Saturday just to kind of explore, just in case. And then we flew back Sunday. A couple weeks later, got the job offer. And a couple months later, we sold our house and we were on our way to Texas. We spent 6 years in Texas. Actually, I spent 4.5 years at that company and then ended up moving on to another company. And at a certain point, my wife was, she was ready to move on from Texas. Like, we knew it wasn't ever going to be permanent. We didn't know how long we were going to be there for. We loved Bastrop, but we were also ready for just something different. 2 kids from Long Island, it's hard to keep us away from the water. And living in Bastrop, it was whether we went to Rockport, whether we went to Corpus Christi or Port Aransas or Galveston, it was a 3-hour drive either way. So, we hated that because it was always a full day commitment if we were going to go to the beach. So we didn't get to do it nearly as often as we liked, or would have liked rather. But at a certain point, we were ready to move on, and I ended up getting another job, which ended up being fully remote, which was really nice. And that gave us the opportunity to move back east, get back on the East Coast. And, we had explored Florida when we were getting ready to leave New York. We were checking out Jacksonville, St. Augustine, that area. My wife's youngest sister and her husband live in Fort Lauderdale, so we've spent plenty of time there. And we knew enough about Fort Lauderdale that we love it, but we didn't want to live there. It felt a little, I guess, too big, a little too much like New York for us. and so a bunch of people were saying, check out Tampa. And so we did. Before we decided to finally move, we came here, checked it out for several days, and we just fell in love with it. And so we eventually moved here. And so we've been here for just over 2 years, actually.
Nice. I like Tampa quite a bit. I spent some time there way back when doing some work. And little known fact, this is kind of ironic. Bastrop, Texas. I've been through Bastrop probably, I don't know, 5,000-6,000 times. And I had an office in College Station, which is Bastrop is right in between San Antonio and College Station.
College Station is actually where my second job in Texas was.
Well, there you go. I lived in College Station for 10 years before I moved down here to San Antonio, and my office was there. So I go back and forth. And a little known fact about me is the Buc-ee's at Bastrop. Hopefully it was there when you were a resident there and you got to enjoy it. One of the greatest stores in the world.
Oh, yeah, I love
one of the greatest places in the world. And I actually bought a painting that I saw one day when I was in the bathroom, and I don't have it right here with me, but it's just out of the frame, and it's one of those pictures of the beaver, and he's got this little pickup truck, and he's out harvesting beaver nuggets. So there you go, Bastrop, Texas. It's a small world, isn't it?
It really is. I saw that painting multiple times. Once I started working the second job, the one in College Station, I was, obviously, it's a very long commute. It's probably about 85 miles each way. So I was filling up my car every other day. And so I'd frequently stop at Buc-ee's, and, if I had to use the restroom. I loved those paintings all over the place. Buc-ee's, for anybody who doesn't live in Texas or one of the other states that Buc-ee's is expanding to, I know they have a few here in Florida. Buc-ee's it's really the world's biggest rest stop. They have everything you need and a million things you didn't know you needed. There's just anything and everything at that store. It really is amazing.
Yes, Buc-ee's is a thing of beauty, and I've been to many of them all over the state of Texas. And I will say this, okay? I was extremely irritated when I found out that these were not actually like original pieces of artwork. And I guess I was just fooled into thinking that someone was sitting around just painting these things up one of a kind.
One at a time.
And I remember I bought it and I thought, oh, this is so cool. I had it in the backdrop of my podcast for a while. I've removed it out of shame because it wasn't original artwork, but I went to the other Buc-ee's over in East Texas. I just had stopped there, and I was walking in, and there it was. And I just thought to myself, well, there you go, Chuck. You were swindled, you were hoodwinked, whatever. But then it made sense as to why this original piece of artwork would cost $100. I thought, that's a pretty good deal. I'm going to go ahead and support the local artist. Well, come to find out, local artist has a little a factory going, and he's just putting them out there in thousands, but didn't diminish the value of the story. And now, all these years later, I got to tell the story about having the Buc-ee's painting. So it wasn't a lost cause.
No, it's not a lost cause, and it's still a great story. Buc-ee's really is amazing. They've got a lot of great paintings, even if they aren't one of a kinds. But that place is amazing. Anybody who, if you're driving through, like I said, Texas or pretty much anywhere in the southeastern United States, and you come across a Buc-ee's, you're on crack if you don't stop. You have to stop. You have to experience it.
Yeah, and you have to have a minimum of $60 available in your checking account when you stop. And that's going to get you the candied pecans. It's going to get you probably a nice cup of coffee, some beaver nuggets, and potentially a roast beef sandwich, which, quite frankly, is the best $14 you will spend that day, no matter what else you buy.
And the bag's of ice.
Yeah, you can't go wrong.
No, if you have barbecues or get-togethers and you need ice, I know we actually we were in Bastrop earlier this year for the eclipse, and the prices of ice have gone up a little bit because apparently water is more expensive. When we were living there, a 10-pound bag of ice was 79 cents and a 20-pound bag was 99 cents. And now I think it's like $1.99 for a 20-pound bag, which is still absurdly cheap. So I saw guys frequently, I guess if they were heading down to the coast, they would just be loading up the back of their pickups with bags of ice because you can't get it cheaper anywhere else. But everything else in Buc-ee's is pretty expensive.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the hook. My roofing guys go there all the time because they can get the ice and the water for cheap. And
Yeah.
I get stuck paying premium dollars for everything else. Wouldn't have it any other way. I love Texas, and that's one of the main reasons why. So there you go. It is a small world. And like I said, I did some work down in Tampa way back in 2000.
Oh, wow.
I did some help preparing the Raymond James Stadium for the Super Bowl that year, which totally different life, totally different
Yeah.
experience, but a little bit of time down in Tampa as well. So well traveled, and I appreciate the locations you're at. You know how to pick some prime locations, and
Definitely.
yeah. So tell me a little bit about your podcast. We were looking it up, and I know you've got a new podcast that just came out. Tell
Just
me
came
a
out.
little bit about your podcasting journey to this point, and how things have been going.
All right. So the podcast is called Our Dead Dads. It is a topic that a lot of people do not openly want to talk about, at least not at first. It's about loss, grief, trauma, moving forward, dealing with all of the hard crap in life. Again, stuff that people frequently do not want to talk about. So I kind of came up with this idea for this podcast early this year. The last company that I was working at in 2022 and 2023, I was on a long-term contract, which ended at the end of 2023. So for the beginning of this year, for the first time pretty much ever, I found myself unemployed. And while I was on my search to find a new job, I was also starting to kind of climb the walls and go a little crazy because I didn't have a lot to do. And I started I actually started by I was talking to a friend of mine that I used to work with, and she was thinking about doing a podcast. And so, of course, the thought goes through my mind: could I do something? What would it look like? Immediately, the first thing that came into my mind that if I were to do a podcast, it would be something around grief and loss. And I say that because of what I went through with my dad 3 years ago when he passed. Now, my dad and I'm the oldest of seven. My dad was married and divorced 5 times. We did not have an overly close relationship. I would call it a very complicated relationship, and that's unfortunately because of the person that he was. I mean, again, you can't be complicated. You can't not be complicated and have 5 marriages and divorces.
Yep.
I don't know. We went through a lot with him. It wasn't all bad, but it certainly wasn't all good. At the end of his life, when he had passed, the feelings that I had initially were relief, and on 2 different levels. I was relieved because he was no longer physically in pain, and he had been dealing with a lot of physical problems for many years. He was in a car accident when he was 17. He got T-boned. He went through the windshield. The car rolled over, broke his hip, crushed his pelvis. He spent a year in the hospital. It was a long journey back. This is way before I was born. But he did. He came back from it. He bounced back. And honestly, when I was a kid, I was actually talking about this on another interview a few days ago, thinking about it, I never remember any indication that he had ever gone through that. He had like a burn scar on his leg, but that was it. We would play baseball and we were running around the backyard, and I mean, the man could move like the wind. I just always remember him just flying, and never any indication that anything was wrong as a child. And of course, the problem started later on in life, but then he just largely didn't take care of himself, and one problem turned into 2, turned into 10. And so when he passed, the feeling of relief about him not being in pain anymore, that was a big one. But also it was a lot of relief that just the stuff that my 3 younger brothers and I largely went through with him were over. It was finally done. We didn't have to deal with his negative attitude, his negative attitude towards anything, his yelling, his screaming, his arguing, his general attitude, his negative comments, his racist comments, his rants about whatever he didn't like in life. We were just honestly relieved it was over. We flew up to New York. We had the funeral, went back to Texas, and just started going back to life. And for a few months, I was largely fine. And then probably like toward the end of summer of 2021, I was getting to the point where he was kind of crossing my mind more than I really wanted him to be at that point. I honestly wanted to not forget about him, but I just wanted to move on from all the stuff that we went through. And I was starting to notice that the more I was thinking about him, the more irritated I was getting, because it was like, all right, enough of this already. And I was starting to get angry and irritable and snapping at people. Unfortunately, mostly my wife. Luckily, she did not throw it back at me. She knew what was going on, and she said, I really think you need to talk to somebody. And she was right. And I did. And I went online, found a therapist online, actually, who was in San Antonio. And we started weekly sessions talking about anything and everything, feelings, emotions, dealing with my dad, the good stuff, the bad stuff. Excuse me. And that went on for about 6 months. And it got a little bit better each week. We got to the point where at the end of those 6 months, I was in a much better place. I don't ever say that I was cured, because I'm not sure if you're ever cured when you go through something like that, but I was in a much better place. I forgave myself for being angry at him. I forgave him for being the person that he was and for not being the person that we all knew he had the potential to be. I just basically let go of all the anger I had toward him. And, since that ended, I've never spent a day angry at him, and I never will again. Partially because I was able to get in a better place, and partially because I selfishly have better things to spend my energy on than being angry at somebody who's no longer here, and somebody who, if he had kept on living, never would have changed. So fast forward a while and starting to think about the idea of doing a podcast. And it occurred to me that a lot of people are in similar situations to me, and sometimes not as bad, sometimes much worse, with regards to grief and loss. When I was growing up, again, I was born in 1975, so basically growing up in the early mid 80s, nobody ever talked about feelings, emotions, especially not men, and especially not with boys. It was unfortunately something that if anything emotional or regarding feelings came up, that was always answered by saying, don't worry about that. That's for the women. Leave that. That's girl stuff. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's the way it was dealt with when I was growing up. And so, all right, well, then I guess, men, we don't need to talk about it. And we grow up and we're more fucked up than ever because nobody talks about it. And anytime that there's something that just goes unsaid, all right, fine, you forget about it for a little bit, but when it comes up later, you don't know how to deal with it. You don't have the tools to deal with it, and it just makes a bad situation even worse. So I decided to kind of create a platform where I would give people an opportunity to talk about all the crap that they haven't been able to talk about before. Or there's a lot of people that I've talked to who have addressed their grief, who have processed their grief, and are willing to open up and tell their stories. And I know from personal experience that there are so many more people who haven't figured out how to even begin that conversation, how to have that kind of a discussion. So the way that I've kind of put this podcast out there and trying to market this is I'm trying to attract two different groups of people. The first one is for people that are willing to lay it all out there, tell a very personal side of their lives, and talk about the trauma that they went through, the grief that they went through, and how they processed it. And the second group of people are the people that have dealt with a lot of stuff in their life and have no idea how to get it started. Again, it's not something that comes up a lot in public conversation, in mainstream conversation. People think it's taboo. People think it's, that's nobody wants to hear about the shit that's going on in my life. Why would anybody want to talk about this? But it's simply not true. We as human beings, we are the best and sometimes the worst species alive. I like to focus on the best. I have seen the best in humanity. We all have. And I like to focus on that. The bad stuff that goes on, that's, again, I mean, there are plenty of other forums to talk about all of that. But when it comes to trying to help each other. It's something that a lot of people don't do nearly enough, but I believe even more people are willing to do. If you are ever going through something and you just need somebody to talk to, whether it's a sibling or a spouse or a friend or a coworker, I promise if you go to that person and say, hey, can we go grab a drink? Can we go grab lunch? Or can we just talk for a few minutes? I've got some stuff I just really need to talk about. I don't know who to talk to about, and I just have to get it off my chest. I promise you, anybody who you talk to about that, they're not going to say, no, I don't want to talk to you about that. Everybody's going to be willing to do it. But it's still, it's a very private thing. But at least on some level, the conversation is getting started. There's so many people that don't know how to start that. And I really think that we, as a society, anywhere in the country, doesn't matter where you live in this country, and you and I have both been to so many parts of this country, it needs to become normal conversation. And I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to normalize this kind of conversation. And yes, society is getting a little bit better, especially the younger generation. Younger people, kids, more are in therapy than ever were 20, 30, 40 years ago. So it is improving, but we have a long way to go. So that's basically why I started this podcast, to just start these difficult conversations, to normalize them, and to not have people feel so negative about just talking about this stuff. And at this point, yes, the podcast did launch this past Tuesday, June 18th. The first 3 episodes dropped, and those 3 episodes are my story is episode number 1, talking to my 3 brothers is number 2, and talking to 3 of my best friends is number 3. The 7 of us have been a very tight group for a long time. I've known these 3 guys since junior high school. We've always been very close. All of our dads are gone. So that's why I started with the 7 of us, because we've always had each other to talk to about these things. And that's another point that I try to drive home in those episodes, that how lucky we are that we have each other to talk to about not just our, losing our dads, but about all of the hard crap that we've dealt with in life. We're very fortunate that we have each other. Not everybody has a big group of friends, or sometimes even one person who is, I don't know, close enough to, or that they feel comfortable enough with, or they trust enough. A lot of people don't even feel comfortable talking to their spouses about this stuff. It's just stuff that they feel like, especially, unfortunately, especially men. We're big, tough men. We have to hold this stuff in. We have to man up. We have to suck it up. We have to be strong for everybody else. It's bullshit. We don't have to be. But unfortunately, a lot of people still feel like we have to be. So that's why I'm trying to kind of shatter that wall and make everybody realize that it really is okay to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, there is a real place for that conversation at any phase. Like you said, people that are just now starting to go through things that could be trying to them or troubling. Sometimes you feel overwhelmed. And I can be honest, my personal situation over the last couple of years was a little bit hectic and a little bit crazy. And you go through the loss of parents and things like that, and some of the things that go along with it. And I understand exactly what you mean when you say, there was a sense of relief more than anything, because it finally, it's done, it's over. Like, at the end of those things is when you really learn about yourself. And that's when you really kind of endure the most pain and the most suffering. Yeah. And I think that's when most people really do assume that they're by themselves and that nobody else would understand. And you make a great point, Nick, when you say, it's hard for people to open up to their friends, their family. You don't want people to think differently of you. So to provide a platform, to provide a forum where people can go and they can tell their story to someone who's been through it and understands, it really is a life-changing scenario. And, kudos to you, because that's a tough thing. I like I just told you, my podcast, I've had magicians and morticians and professional wrestlers and roofing people and all kinds of stuff, but it's never really been focused on one particular thing that could be beneficial to, society in general. And that's a pretty tough thing to take on. So congratulations on that. And, with that podcast now, you are you're willingly accepting the fact that you're going to be meeting a lot of people along the way. You're going to hear a lot of different stories, which to me is the most rewarding part of doing a podcast. Tell me a little bit about your vision for it, what you intend for it to be, yourself, your friends, like you say, your brothers, and, you're going to venture off and find some other people, I'm sure, to, continue to create fresh content and to help as many people as possible. So what does it look like for you as far as the overall vision of the podcast is concerned?
That's a great question. And I'm not sure that I have a complete answer to that just yet. As I said, I have released the first 3 episodes, and it always was my intention to release those 3 episodes on day one, just to, from a lot of the people that I've spoken to in the podcasting world, it's good to get a decent amount of content out right away so you can give people enough to listen to kind of draw them in and hopefully keep them coming back for more. As far as where we're going from here, a lot of it is uncertain at this point. I have done a lot of interviews. I've already actually done 16 interviews at this point. I've got another like 8 to 10 that are either on the calendar or are in the works. So luckily, I do have quite a bit of content so far that I'm getting ready to release, and we'll be releasing over the next weeks and months. This coming week, I'm going to be releasing 2 episodes, and then after that will be 1 episode every week, every Tuesday. The interview number 4 is actually going to be myself and my wife, because her dad passed as well. So we're going to talk about both of our dads, how it's affected our relationship, just a lot of things that our dads had in common. And so we're going to see where that goes from there. And with other folks that I've spoken to, number 5 is actually going to be a former national best-selling author. I've spoken, and then after that, I've spoken to therapists, I've spoken to life coaches, I've spoken to just everyday people, I've spoken to other podcasters, all talking about their stories. Largely, it is around dads and dead dads, and there are a couple of other stories that I have done so far that actually don't involve dads. One in particular that I'm really excited about is a gentleman from Long Island. Excuse me, a gentleman from Long Island. He runs a camp for children, a bereavement grief camp. It's for children who are between the ages of 7 and 17 who have lost a parent or a sibling. The camp is entirely free. It is all run by all the work by the adults is entirely volunteer. Nobody's getting paid for their work. It's a twice a year full weekend camp. They bring the kids in. A lot of them are repeat campers, but they're all there for the same reason. They've all either lost a parent or sibling, in some cases both, and they are helping. They're allowing the kids to have a lot of fun, and there are also different counseling sessions that they go through during the weekend to help those kids. So that is a pretty incredible thing, and especially because it's on Long Island, where I'm originally from. When that episode, it's a little bit further back in the calendar because it was a more recent interview, but that one's going to be one that I'm obviously going to push a lot, and I'm going to get my Long Island community to hopefully put the word out about that. But these are, like, again, he's someone who is just trying to do amazing work to help children. The other folks that I've spoken to, like I said, coaches, life coaches and therapists, they've all been through their own crap, and it's frequently said that sometimes the helper needs to be helped as well. And so that's why I'm so excited to work with them. And as far as where this is going, I'm not really sure, but what I do know that I want to do is get this out there as much as I possibly can. Anybody who, you as a podcaster knows, you don't go into podcasting to try to be a millionaire. And that was never my intention. I wasn't doing this to try
Definitely
to.
not.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes some people strike gold and it happens and word can really spread. If this happens, that would be amazing. I did put a lot of work into this up front. I know other people who have started their own podcasts who basically did like 2 weeks worth of work, and then they just started and they record content, on a Monday and release it on a Thursday, and they just keep going at that pace. Sometimes it isn't necessarily work that you have to do a lot of preparation for. This one, this this topic is. I have to find people. I have to have initial conversations with them to make sure that the topic they want to talk about is relevant to the show, that it's going to make a good interview. It's not something that I can just bring somebody on with no preparation, because then you don't know what they're going to say. It might be a terrible interview, and then I've wasted my time and theirs. And I hate to put it that way. I don't ever want to think of it as wasting time, but there's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into this. I did spend about 4 months preparing this. I actually took a 10-week online course for building a podcast. It was a lady who I've had actually been following her podcast anyway, and then I saw that she was offering this course, so I started that. And then in the middle of that, ended up starting a new full-time job. So for the last almost 3 months, it basically has been like working 2 full-time jobs for me. But I love it. And the main reason why I decided to do a podcast about this theme isn't necessarily just about grief. It is because I have just forever, for my entire life, I've had just this burning desire in me to help people. When I was younger, I wanted to be a math teacher for a while. I've always just had a natural gift with math and with numbers. I can't explain it. I don't understand it myself, but I know that I'm really good at it. And it's just something that I've kind of used to my advantage over the years. And for a while, I wanted to be a math teacher. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. And then I was already several years into this industry. And so I've stayed in this industry so long because we are helping people on a larger scale, in the pharma and clinical trial industry. I mean, I'm one very small piece of a huge puzzle and a huge machine that's helping people. And it has been rewarding. It really has. But as I kind of learned earlier this year, it wasn't enough. So that's why I came up with the idea of doing this podcast. And as far as going forward, again, I don't know how big this will or won't become. I hope it will continue to grow, and maybe I'll have 12 dedicated listeners at some point. But I want to help as many people as I possibly can. I want to just put this platform out there and have people know that somebody cares enough to listen, to want to help, to want to invest their time in the personal life of somebody else, to just get the conversation started, to help them understand that there's nothing going on in this world that's too important that their well-being and their mental health is not worth contributing to. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not really sure. I don't have, long-term plans or, being on TV or anything like that. I'm just gonna take this one day at a time, 1 week at a time, one interview at a time, and hope that as I'm doing this, the folks that I'm interviewing with feel passionate enough about being able to put their personal story out there, to share it with their social media audiences. And hopefully, each time that somebody that I interview shares it with their Facebook group or their Instagram group, hopefully there will be 1 or 2 or 3 people out of all of those followers that will hear that interview and be intrigued enough to start listening to my podcast. And then hopefully from there, somebody will tell somebody and they will tell somebody. I mean, that's how I got into podcasting. My wife heard a podcast that she was listening to probably 8 or 9 years ago. She got me into listening it when I started the new job in College Station, and I was going to be spending almost 3 hours a day on the road. I put a message out on Facebook and say, hey, I'm about to start spending a lot of time driving. Who can recommend a good podcast to listen to? And so I started on a couple podcasts from there. And you never know how these things will just spread, but I'm hoping that a lot of people will hear this and will feel passionate enough about the topic and the work that I'm trying to do to tell others about it. You and I were talking just before we started this interview about how you need to be real, you need to be authentic. And I do believe that is what anyone who's listening to a podcast is going to navigate to when you're putting out authenticity. You're not trying to bullshit somebody. I believe people are going to be drawn to that. And again, when we're talking about a a topic that is very real, that affects every single person that you and I have ever known and every single person that you and I have not ever known. Grief is not linear. Grief is not exclusive to a small group of people. It affects all of us. It affects us in different ways. But I do believe that there is a larger group of people out there that might be interested in what I'm talking about and why I'm trying to help people, and hopefully be drawn into this and just continue to spread the word. So we'll kind of see where this goes. I hope it becomes something that eventually a lot of people want to listen to and spread the word about. In these interviews, it's not just all horrible, sad, depressing topics. Yes, we're talking about grief and loss and trauma. I've spoken to people who have lost their dads at an early age and then also lost siblings tragically, people who were in very abusive families growing up, had parents who were addicted to drugs, parents who were physically abusive. I've spoken to, there's one lady that I spoke to her interview is actually coming up soon. She lost her mom to cancer at 14 and lost her sister to cancer about 10 years ago, and then lost her dad a few years ago. She didn't have the overly best relationship with her dad, but she was able to kind of repair that, but then lost her dad while on vacation to an accidental drowning. So, I mean, how it could have broken her, and she turned it around. She became a life coach and she dealt with her grief in a very productive way. And now she's helping other people to deal with grief in a more productive way. So it's not just about me. I'm also trying to promote the services of people who I speak with who are willing to put them out there. So I just hope that this can be a big game of paying it forward. It's not just about, hey, listen to my podcast. It's also the therapists that I'm talking to, the life coaches that I'm talking to, just the average everyday people that I'm talking to. They are putting themselves out there and saying to the listeners, look, if you ever need someone to talk to, if you've got stuff going on in your life and you don't know where to deal with, come talk to me. And, I put all of their, their website and their social media information and contact information in the episode notes. And everybody pretty much so far has been putting it out there that they, you'll hear that in future episodes, but it's been putting it out there that we're not alone and you should never feel like you're alone. And if you ever need someone to talk to, then, you've got my information now and come talk to me. So I'm just trying to get a larger conversation going that has been very necessary for pretty much my entire life and probably a lot longer than that. Because, when my dad was growing up, it was not a situation where he could ever talk to his dad. He was an only child. It was his mom's job to keep the family together. It was his dad's job to support the family. His dad, they were living on Long Island. His dad commuted. He was a chef, commuted into New York City 5-6 days a week. So he wasn't there emotionally to have those kind of conversations. But again, 50, 60 years ago, it wasn't even a priority. Nobody was thinking about mental health and trying to just better ourselves and have difficult conversations like this. It was largely ignored. And to a big degree, it's still ignored. Like I said before, it's getting better, but we have a long way to go. So I guess that's my goal, is to get further down that road, get these conversations going, let people know that this is not taboo. You don't need to feel embarrassed or ashamed or just feel stupid about needing to talk about trauma that you've been through in your life. You don't have to feel bad about this. You just have to start talking about it. So I guess I know that was a roundabout way of getting to that final answer, but I hope that kind of answered your question.
Absolutely. And the truth of the matter is, you don't go in with a plan, because every plan that we make is going to have all kinds of roadblocks and bumps and twists and turns. So it was the same thing for me. When I started this podcast, it was completely different than it is now. It was actually myself, and I had 3 other co-hosts, and we did a live show, and we would come on and talk about, such gripping topics as, the best gas station food in Texas, the best place to go fishing, all these important things. We tell our golf stories and such. And it's kind of evolved. And I never really have set forth any kind of goal. And the guy that I had on here the other day, we were talking about this very thing. And it was like, if you look at the numbers and you say, you know, oh my gosh, only 300 people viewed my video this week. Like, oh my God, only 300. But if you put that in perspective and you're standing in an empty room and all of a sudden there's 300 people there, that's a pretty good crowd. And when you put it into those perspectives, you think about it and you say, okay, if I reach one of those 300 people that watched it in a positive way, and that can domino effect onto the next person and so on and so forth, who knows how many people you're going to reach? Who knows how far reaching across the world? And, you know, there's going to be someone that comes up to you 20 years from now and says, hey, guess what, man? What you said on this episode that you had with this person really struck a nerve with me and it hit home. And because of you, I got the help I needed. I was able to overcome that grief and that trauma. And, you know, again, thank you for doing that. There's not enough people that do that in this world. And it's definitely something that's much needed.
Thank you for saying that. I really do appreciate it. And again, I'm not looking at myself as any kind of a hero or anything like that. It's just my way of trying to do what I think we should all be doing naturally, is just trying to help each other out. You know, and a lot of people do. A lot of people will always find ways to help other people, and some people are, you know, very selfish and want to make it all about me, me, me. And if it works for them, that's fine too. That just doesn't work for me. And I love what I'm doing. I love what you're doing. You're talking to other people and just getting stories out there. And no matter what we do, if we do something, if everybody does a little something like this, doesn't have to be starting a podcast, but just helping others. I think that's the way that we're all going to just become better people in a better society.
Yeah. And, you know, I do it because it's fun. I like talking to people. And if I got caught up in the numbers and all that, I probably would be depressed at times. Yeah. But the reality is I'm the only one in my mind that matters as far as the people that I get to talk to, the stories I get to hear. And if somebody that's a roofer watches this episode and says, hey, man, you know what? That episode was not roofing related in any way, but it was the most impactful one that I've ever had.
Right.
Great. That's why we do it. So let me veer off topic, not really off topic, but kind of, we were a little serious about the topic of the podcast, but I want to talk more about the actual preparation that goes into a podcast. You mentioned something that really piqued my interest, which was taking a course to learn about how to do a setup for a podcast. Now, I'm going to be totally honest. I've never taken any courses. I listened to Howard Stern and I listened to some guys on the radio, and I've always wanted to be that. And that's basically what I modeled this whole thing after. But what kind of steps do you take when you're starting from square one? You're going to build a podcast. And I ask you this because I do have a lot of people that watch this, and then they ask me, you know, how do you start a podcast? So here's a great perspective from someone who's doing it right now, and it's going to be probably different than the way I've done it. So
sure. Yeah. So actually, if you don't mind, I'll actually answer. I'm going to throw two things out there before I go into a little bit of detail about the podcast itself. It's funny that you mentioned like listening to Howard Stern. I've been listening to Stern since I was a teenager. He was always, you know, in New York. He was on K-Rock 92.3 FM, and listened to him there way before he was on WNBC. And I was just, I don't know, his humor was absurd and it was ridiculous and it was so funny. And it's funny that you mentioned that with doing something, like you said, starting something around like what he did. The group of 7 of us, one of my friends in that group, he had suggested sometime last year about how we should all start a podcast, and he wanted to do it similar to Howard Stern's show. And I said, absolutely not, because his show has been tried to be copied many times and everybody pretty much fails every time. And I just wanted to do something that was different and real and authentic, and not trying to make it seem like we were trying to copy somebody else. So And needless to say, we did not do it that way. But again, it's funny that you mentioned that, so I figured I would throw that out there. As far as this class goes, so I have mentioned on my show and a couple of other interviews, and I hope it's okay that I mention here. The lady that I follow, for anybody who's already heard on my show or hasn't, her name is Christina Driscoll. Christina is KR, not CHR. Christina Driscoll. Her podcast is called the She's Brave podcast. She interviews amazing women all over the world. I think she's closing in on 100 episodes for her podcast. She is pretty well up in the rankings. Her podcast is in the top 2% globally. And so I had come across her podcast and thought it was pretty interesting what she was talking about and started following her. And then a couple weeks later, she puts out there that she's going to be doing this 10-week class. And I will say also, she is another one who really lit the fire under me to get this going. I had a conversation with her, told her my ideas. She said, "This is amazing. You really need to do this." And again, at the time, I was out of work. So I was really worried about spending the money on the course, the financial commitment for the equipment and the software and all the monthly and weekly subscriptions I was going to have to do to get all this going. She basically said, "Look, I get the concern about the money part, but she said, you've got a great idea. You've got the voice for this. You've got the passion." She said, "If you don't do this now, if you wait until you have a full-time job, you're going to find 100 reasons to say you're too busy and you will never do it. Start now. And once you find a full-time job, if it gets to be too much, you can always step back from podcasting. But if you really love it, you just might find a way to make both work." And I really have done that. The 10-week class that she did, it was every Thursday afternoon. I think it was 1:00 Eastern. That's the time that we did that. And she will have other classes. She's done it before. I'll very briefly talk about just the topics that we talked about. Week 1 was choosing a podcast topic. Like, all of us were just on the Zoom call talking about what we wanted to do. Week 2 was recording your podcast trailer. Just some of the things you say, the length of it. She told us about how a trailer should be between 1 and 3 minutes. 1 and 3 minutes long. You don't want to have a 15-minute trailer. I mean, think about it like when you go to the movies and you're watching the movie trailers, they're always about 2 to 3 minutes long. It's the perfect amount for a trailer. What was week 3? Week 3 was mastering your workflow, just making sure that you've got all of your ducks in a row about how you're going to go about this each week. Week 4 was beginning interviews and how to do the interviews, checking your technique. Week 5 is permission to play. Week 6 is the algorithm of life and of podcasts. Everybody's so worried about the algorithm. Week 7, we got into SEO, search engine optimization basics. Let's see, what was week 8? Week 8 was monetizing your podcast, which again, that's why a lot of people get into it. I haven't done too much with that. About the most that I've done so far is put out there that like my website is still being worked on. It's under construction. I'm going to have a merchandise store once that gets up there. And as far as monetizing beyond that, not entirely sure. Week 9 was talking to everybody in the class about the importance of rating, reviewing, subscribing to podcasts. We all did it for each other, and just putting out the message to your listeners to make sure if you like what you hear, go on to whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or iHeart or whatever platform you listen on, give the show and give the host a good rating, leave a review, tell other people about it, because again, that's how word spreads. And then week 10 was just kind of a recap of everything. And, each call was, I'd say, between 1 and 2 hours. Not everybody was always able to stay on for every single call. But the good thing is they were all recorded on Zoom. Everybody in the class got the Zoom link for the call the next day. So we were able to either go back and watch anything that we couldn't stay on for, or if you just ever needed extra notes, that was all there. We went through a lot of details. Christina is amazing. She's such a good teacher. She went through everything with us. There was no question she wouldn't answer. There were some folks in the class who already had existing podcasts and just wanted to improve theirs or find ways to make theirs a little bit better. And there were a lot of us that we were brand new to it. I think there were probably about 15 or so of us in the class. And it was a good mix of topics, a good mix of new podcasters versus established podcasters. We just had a lot of fun with it. And there were, she every week before the class, she always sent out a PDF of a bunch of notes and different items to learn and to know, things to research, things that we always talked about during the class. She gave us a lot of good information, and I would highly, I don't know, when she's going to be doing her next class, excuse me. But if anybody wants to follow Christina, then I think you should find her page on Facebook. It's very accessible. Find her podcast page and just talk with her. And, when she, follow what she does, talk to people who have taken her class like me, and there are plenty of others who are willing to share information. And, I'm sure she'll be doing another class soon. And I mean, I could not recommend it more highly. I mean, it's the reason why I got into doing what I'm doing. And then as far as anything else, again, I as I said, I spent 4 months kind of just preparing this before it ever launched, because I didn't want to just put out a half-assed product. I wanted to put out something that was going to have a decent chance of sustainability. The website is kind of the last thing that I did, because I was more focused on making sure I had the content and getting it edited, having it ready to launch, finding really good people to talk about, finding compelling topics to talking about. Because again, talking about something like this isn't always easy. But I'm trying to just present it in the best possible way. Putting out there to everybody that it's also okay to incorporate humor into topics like this. Me and my brothers and my friends, dark humor is something that we've always had in our lives. But again, with my 3 brothers and friends that I've known since I was a kid, you're never going to not have something like humor and dark humor in that. And a lot of the people that I've interviewed have incorporated that into as well. They realize that it's okay to, laugh about things they've been through, even, if they're, years later. But just getting yourself organized. There are so many checklists and just other lists that organize all of your steps for you. Some are steps that you're going to find you don't need to do. Many of them are steps you are going to need to do. There's so many resources out there. There are paid resources. There are also a lot of free resources. Again, if you take Christina's class, you're going to get a lot of information there, but there's also plenty of tools out there. You just need to know where to search. There are podcast collaboration groups. There are find a guest groups. That's how I've found a lot of folks that I have either had on my show or other shows that I've been on. That's how I found you. And podcasting is a community. And if you're going to jump into it, you need to embrace that, and you need to be part of it. You need to talk to people. You need to listen to people. You need to listen to those who have been in this industry longer, because almost everybody is very willing to share a lot of information on how to grow this, to possibly grow your podcast. And if you come across someone who's not willing to share information, just stop talking to them very quickly and move on to somebody else, because this really is a collaboration of so many other people. Different podcasters interview each other all the time. This isn't a situation where I need to make my podcast as big as I possibly can. So I'm not going to talk to somebody like Chuck or someone like any other person that I've talked to because they're my competition. That's bullshit. We're not each other's competition. We're not invading each other's listener markets. We're not taking listeners away from each other. We are all helping each other to grow our own shows and to help others grow their shows. That's what podcasting is all about. Some people will have, one podcast that they listen to, very dedicated, and they won't listen to anything else. And that's fine. But most people will kind of get out there and put some feelers and experiment and find out what else is out there. Just help each other. Kind of like the whole theme of my podcast is the same theme for if you want to start a podcast. Just just talk to people and find out what works. And again, it's going to be a lot of experimenting for yourself. Know that you have a good topic that you want to talk about. Don't be afraid to try things, and especially don't be afraid to fail. You need to learn a lot, and you're going to try things. You're going to learn. You're going to fail. You're going to learn more. You're going to fail more, and eventually you're going to figure out what works. Of the years that I spent listening to podcasts before I ever started this one, I didn't realize until probably the last few months or so how much stuff I was actually paying attention to that I didn't realize I was paying attention to. Like over the years, I had thought about, oh, this is really cool. I like how they do this, or I'm not so crazy about the way they do this. Never thinking then that I was going to, kind of retain that information for a podcast that I would do at some point. But if you've listened to podcasts for any length of time, and then you decide to start one of your own, think back to all the different shows that you've listened to. Think about all the things that you like that you heard. Think about some of the things that you didn't like that you heard, and incorporate those into your show. And again, don't be afraid to mess up. Week 1 of the class that we did, the first task that Christina gave us was recording a 1 minute a 1 minute introduction to, like, if we were just putting out there for our podcast, basically just, I don't have it on me. How do I not have my phone on me? Take your phone, use the voice recorder app, and just talk for 1 minute, introducing your podcast to the world. It took me 30 minutes to record that stupid message because I kept messing up, and I was getting inside my own head thinking, oh my God, this is ridiculous. It needs to be perfect. It needs to sound right. Not thinking, like, you dummy, like, nobody's going to hear this. It's just a task. Just stop, get out of your own head. Just talk, just like for 1 second, just stop being so dumb about this and just talk about what you're going to do. And if you stumble on your words, okay, fine. That's why, for some people that do this, that's why there's editing software. You can talk over yourself, and you can edit out the ums and the uhs and the gaps in time. If there's silence for several seconds, you can edit all that out. You can make it sound better. You don't need to make it sound perfect. You don't want it to sound always like it's necessarily professionally done. And sometimes when you do something, it's going to sound great just by doing what you naturally do. So just have fun with it. Just try different things. Just experiment a little bit, and you're going to get better at it. You're going to figure out what works. You're going to figure out what doesn't work. Just have a good topic. Have something that you think people will want to listen to. And it doesn't honestly, it doesn't even have to be one topic. It can just be one platform. Like your show, you are talking about different things to different folks every single episode. And that's great because you're keeping it fresh. You're not going to ever get stale. You're talking about so many different topics, and yeah, sure, people might not know what's coming up on the next episode, but that's also what makes it amazing. Is I've looked at your episode list, and some of the things that you've talked about there, I mean, it is all over the place, but that's the great part about it. So I would say to people, don't necessarily stress. Yes, like, I have one theme that I'm keeping, and I'm going to talk to different people, and we never know what we're going to talk about each week. But if you have an idea like Chuck's, and you want to talk to people about different things every week, that's amazing too. Just be yourself, be authentic, keep it real, or keep it Rio, and just have fun with it. That's the best advice that I can give. And, again, the other information that I've given, if you decide to take a class. And if you'd like, Chuck, I can also provide you with links to Christina's page if anybody wants to reach out to her and potentially see when there would be another class. I think that anybody has any remote interest in getting into podcasting, I think, can definitely benefit from this class.
Yeah, and it's something I think next week will be the 3-year anniversary of Keeping It Rio.
That's
and
amazing.
You're talking about all these things, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, I wish that someone would have explained that to me 2.5 years ago before I took some lumps and I learned along the way. But even now, I feel like there's so much that I have no idea about. I'm just flying blindly and having fun. And it's like, you could still do a better job, and you can still make it a little more presentable. You can still do
Sure.
better things. And I am going to pursue something like that because I do want to get better. My ultimate goal for this, I set a goal of 2,500 episodes. So I'm at 172 or 173, whatever it is now. So we've got a little ways to go. There's going to be constant improvement from now till, whenever that is, a few weeks from now. And yeah, I think it's amazing. And it's so cool that we've got the ability to do these things now. And I absolutely love it. So I am ready to kind of wind it down. We're at the 1 hour mark, which is where I try to keep the episodes about an hour.
Okay.
It's hard to believe it's been an hour.
It's really hard to believe. I can't believe we've been doing this long.
Yeah, I had a couple questions, but I'm going to cut a couple out. We'll do another episode somewhere down the road. But for now, you got the new podcast out. I want to ask anybody that's watching this episode that wants to follow you, that wants to follow your podcast, your journey, your story. Maybe they want to be a guest. Something comes to mind when they see this and they say, hey, you know what? Maybe this would be the guy that I should tell the story to that's going to help me open up and change my life. What are the best channels for that to happen? And what's your availability as far as social media and things like that?
Sure. So as I said earlier, I do have a website. The domain is already locked in. It's ourdeaddads.com. The website is still under construction, so depending on when this episode drops, you might go to it and find that it's still under construction. Just bookmark it. It will be hopefully up and running within the next couple of weeks. I'm definitely hoping to, we're getting a lot of work into that. But again, everything takes time between a full-time job, this and everything else. These things do take time, but I'm hoping it'll be done soon. Once that website is up, there will be contact pages. There will be a link and a form that you can fill out and answer a bunch of questions if you think you could potentially be a guest, if you've got a story to tell. There are going to be a few other special features about the website, which I won't get into right now just in the interest of time. But so you'll have to go and check the website out. And I actually will drop a quick little bonus episode on my show once the website is up, just to kind of outline all the features of the website. I am on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. I do have a LinkedIn page, and I do actually have a YouTube channel, which doesn't have anything on it as of this moment, doesn't have anything on it. I did start editing my earlier interviews just as audio only, even though I had the video. If I ever do go YouTube, those episodes will probably, I mean, I can upload them just as the audio, but I think maybe later on I will probably start putting video up there as well. But again, you can, all of those social media platforms, you can either search for Our Dead Dads Podcast, or the username for all of them is at Our Dead Dads Pod. So I was able to come up with one name that worked across every platform. So this way it's easy to find. There's my personal page, Nick Gaylord. If you look, if it says in the description, owner and host of Our Dead Dads Podcast, you found the right one. Reach out to me and, let's talk. If you want to just talk and just, be friends and get to know each other, that's great too. If you have a story of your own that you'd like to share, and, if you think that what you've been through could help others, then reach out to me and let's have a conversation, because you never know, you might be the next guest on the show.
Yeah, there you go. So ladies and gentlemen, as always, thank you guys for your continued support of Keeping It Real. Everybody that watches, everybody that listens, it's amazing to me. And as you continue on with your podcasting journey, you'll realize more people pay attention than what we would ever imagine. And you'll find yourself in a grocery store one day and some strange person will come up and tell you that they watch your show and that you've done something to impact them. And I definitely, again, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. Saturday morning, we are going to be wrapping up before the break of dawn, which is great. And I look forward to following your podcast and seeing how everything progresses as well. We'll do another episode somewhere down the road when you get a few episodes under your belt, kind of see how things are progressing at that point. And until next time, like I always end my episodes, the cheesiest tagline in the history of all podcasts, which is very simple. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, keep on keeping it real. We'll see you guys.